What is it about Jeffrey Epstein that is so interesting to people, where they just can't seem to look away? A subject that really just never seems to lose steam. Perhaps it's the government conspiracy aspect. Is Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files part of a larger government cover-up? Are they lying to us?
I can't think of anybody I'm more disgusted by right now in our government than Kash Patel and Pam Bondi for their gross misrepresentation of what this is and their blatant moving of goalposts on the way here. Now that we've seen these files, now that we've read these documents, go back and rewatch what Pam Bondi said.
Our memo on Epstein clearly points out that there was no client list.
What Kash Patel said.
There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals.
What Dan Bongino said.
He killed himself. Again, you want me to get, I've seen the whole file.
There's no evidence that he trafficked girls to anyone. There's no evidence that he worked with anyone in any big conspiracy. It's mind-blowing.
In a previous video, we showed the top 10 strangest photos inside of the Epstein files, and that video is literally blowing up. In another video, we showed every single photo inside of the Epstein files to make sure that you didn't miss anything. But today we're gonna be doing something a little bit different. We're gonna be diving a lot deeper. This video, we're gonna be showcasing Jeffrey Epstein's entire life story from A to Z. Like the murky side of how exactly did this guy make his billions.
And this is my favorite part of the Jeffrey Epstein story, is that he is a man who became a billionaire. And the strangest part about his billionaire status is that nobody knows how he became a billionaire. Yeah, they can't tell us that. That's my favorite part of the whole thing, is just like Chris, my editor, mentioned earlier, you don't pay 8 cents of tax money and they'll be like, right here, my friends. You shorted the government 8 cents, but Jeffrey Epstein, we don't know where he got his billions of dollars.
We're also going to be covering the mystery of Ghislaine Maxwell, who some say was way worse than Jeffrey Epstein, and her father, Robert Maxwell's rise from rich and prominent media tycoon with ties to the intelligence side of the English and Israeli government to straight up criminal, and his death, which still to this day is a literal question mark.
This billionaire was found dead, floating beside his yacht near the Canary Islands. Robert Maxwell ran a highly profitable publishing company in the 1950s called Pergamon Press. But when Maxwell agreed to sell Pergamon in 1969, the investigators realized that it was all a sham. His company owed $3.4 billion to its bankers, and there was a $650 million hole in the pension funds of 16,000 employees. The company's profits were also fake. Maxwell reacquired Pergamon and decades later ended up owning 400 companies. These businesses were only kept alive by shifting funds around his maze of interlocking private companies, misappropriating pension funds, and non-stop deal-making. Ultimately, it all became too much, and it's said that he jumped overboard in 1991, although there are many speculations of what really happened. In 1995, after the most expensive trial in British history, Maxwell's sons, who worked with their father in the business, were cleared of any wrongdoing.
But that's really not it, because this video is going to cover literally everything, like the dark history of Jeffrey Epstein as well as Ghislaine, how they made their money, the blackmail ring, the trials, as well as their dark web of connections that extends from rich and powerful elite like billionaires to intelligence operatives in the CIA and Mossad, and even literal royalty. As well as how they conducted the crimes typically associated with them, from the multiple investigations that always seem to come up empty, to the actual judicial trials themselves that always seem to come up empty, and Jeffrey Epstein's death. Was it really what they said it was? Or we're even gonna talk about stuff that you may not even know about, stuff that's straight up out of the Alex Jones playbook.
Was also very close to Epstein. And he says that the stuff Epstein used to say about genetics freaked him out because it sounded like Nazi eugenics talk. And it was about eugenics. And by the way, Jeffrey Epstein funded the research that led to CRISPR. Our CRISPR, state-of-the-art genetic engineering, that research was funded by him. He wanted to basically implant these CRISPRed fetuses into these women on Zorro Ranch and breed a kind of super race. And interestingly enough, all the women who were being used for that, and the majority of the models that were being funneled through his modeling agency and brought onto the island and so forth, were of Nordic phenotype.
The biggest mystery of all is not what happened on the island, it's why, in 2026, the people who seem to be highly associated with Epstein still are walking free. So if this sounds like it's your type of thing, then do me a favor and go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe right now, because I got some awesome videos coming out super soon. And get your popcorn ready, because we're about to do a super deep dive into the black abyss. This is the unredacted and horrifying true life story of Jeffrey Epstein. The year was 1974 and not a creature was stirring, except for Jeffrey Epstein. Did you know that Jeffrey Epstein went to the College of NYU? Very prestigious. But he didn't actually graduate, so he did not get a degree. But somehow, only a couple months later, he became a teacher of mathematics and physics in a very prestigious private school teaching the children of the most powerful elite in Manhattan. So how does a guy with no degree get a teaching job at a very prestigious private school? You tell me. After only 2 years of teaching, Epstein was dismissed from the job, and the official reason being that his teaching wasn't up to snuff. But later it would come out that he was known to dress very flamboyantly, which bothered a lot of people in this prestigious private school, as well as he was seen at one of the students' local parties where the students were drinking. Once he was dismissed from this prestigious private school, he was actually able to get another job at a extremely prestigious Wall Street firm called Bear Stearns. Now, how did he get that job? He actually impressed the chairman of Bear Stearns at a parent-teacher conference, because the chairman, Alan Ace Greenberg, had a child that was actually going to the school. And in this parent-teacher conference, Epstein was able to impress Alan Ace Greenberg of Bear Stearns so much with his mathematical prowess that he was able to bridge that being dismissed as a teacher into an actual job. The position that he was hired for was junior assistant on the trading floor. Now, junior assistant is one of the lowest positions in the firm, but he's now officially on Wall Street. He's on the trading floor. He's actually in the mix. He's able to secure this job in Wall Street because he's very mathematically gifted. He's so gifted that it didn't take Epstein long to move up. He's able to move from junior assistant into options trading, and eventually into a higher level of wealth management, where he's actually speaking face-to-face with clients, he's interacting with them, and then salesmanship becomes, more of a factor. So he's actually planning estates and advising them on tax strategies for the very, very wealthy. After only 4 years, Epstein was able to make junior partner at Bear Stearns. And Bear Stearns is a very prestigious, at the time, Wall Street firm. So that's a real high level, and he was probably making some pretty serious money. So he was initially hired and known to be very high aptitude at numbers, but it's also reported that his bosses said he was one heck of a salesman. And a lot of Wall Street is about managing money, but initially to get people to invest, it's salesmanship. You got to sell them on this type of stuff. However, trouble was a brewing for Mr. Epstein, as you might expect. Shortly after that, there was an internal investigation at Bear Stearns internally for a securities violation, which, of course, Epstein completely denied. But shortly after, he actually resigned from the company. Now, keep in mind, he's at the junior partner level, so he's making a lot of money. And there was this internal investigation. He resigned, so he's gone, and he goes to start his own consulting firm. Now, it's unclear exactly what happened, but apparently, through some leaked reports, Epstein was apparently loaning himself Bear Stearns money and possibly loaning some of his clients Bear Stearns money. Now, we don't know if he paid that money back, but I think it's kind of safe to say he's given himself a loan. I mean, he's essentially stealing money from Bear Stearns. So the first firm that he makes, it's self-described as a bounty hunter for embezzled funds, meaning a company that has employees that steal money from the company, embezzle the money. He's going out there to recover that money. So essentially, it's kind of like a specialized debt collector or something like that. But eventually, he turns his firm into a full-blown money management company called J. Epstein and Company. With enough years and enough clients investing, where your pool of money gets big enough, then you're essentially on your way to maybe becoming a billionaire. So he's well on his way, and he's making these monstrous moves. Now, to add to the mystique of Epstein, and this is part of the whole enigma that is Epstein and why people are attracted to him. One, they don't really know how he made his money, but two, as far as his investing business, it's billionaires only. So if you're not willing to invest $1 billion, he's not even trying to talk to you. So that adds to the mystique, the enigma of Epstein. His main and key client that he ends up managing the money for is Leslie Wexner. Now, Leslie Wexner owns Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie & Fitch. And this is going to come and become very important later on in the story because it's one of his key clients and it's going to be very pinnacle in lifting his wealth up to a whole nother level. Thirdly, he sets up an estate and tax planning company. So he's managing people's money, but he's also planning their estate and, having tax strategies. Again, billionaires only. He's only doing this for the rich elite. So we're talking about monstrous tax strategies. These are the type of people that might, set up their money offshore so they can avoid taxes because they might have millions of dollars in taxes. Now, this is key because this is where Epstein Island comes into play. He sets up in the U.S. Virgin Islands because the U.S. Virgin Islands has favorable tax laws. So not only does Epstein claim to live on Epstein Island as his main residence, but he does this for his own tax purposes as well as clients' tax purposes so they can gain favorable tax laws. This is the whole point of Epstein Island. He didn't just buy an island for, whatever people buy islands for, but it's for the actual company. Now, as far as we know, which we know it probably isn't, but as far as we know, everything at this point is above board. Until
Epstein's start in the business in the 1980s, after being hired by Bill Barr's dad at the Dalton School, and then going on to Bear Stearns after a personal friendship with its CEO. But then Epstein goes out on his own in 1981 to form International Assets Group, which was basically a one-man asset tracing and asset recovery business, but also an asset shielding business where he would shield assets for oligarchs and governments and hide them away in offshore bank accounts. And then he would claim to help other groups basically play both sides of the chessboard in the greasy business of tax evasion effectively.
Guys, if you're enjoying the video, then do me a favor and hit that like button and make sure you subscribe right meow. I've been doing YouTube for about 3 years and I have jack diddly to show for it. But lately we've been doing pretty good. And I have you to thank for it. But let's get back to the video. Originally, I told you his first company was a bounty hunter for embezzled funds, a debt collection company of sorts. So while he's running that company, he actually does some consulting for a company called Towers Financial Corporation, run by Stephen Hoffenberg, which is an actual debt collection company. But Stephen Hoffenberg and Tower Financial Corporation would actually turn out to be one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history, to the tune of around $462 million. So Epstein's really getting into it now. Now he's getting involved in a corporation, advising them, and it's all a giant Ponzi scheme. Working at Towers Financial Corporation is widely believed to be where Jeffrey Epstein gets the seed money to becoming a billionaire. This is where he starts to really take off, essentially, at Towers Financial Corporation. It's a Ponzi scheme, so he starts to take off in both making a lot of money and breaking the law. Hoffenberg, the CEO, self-describes Epstein as a protege and very pinnacle in his operations. He's paid around $25,000 a month, which is around $70,000 a month in today's terms. Now, as if that wasn't enough, he borrows $2 million from Towers Financial Corporation. The protege, he borrows $2 million and he never actually pays it back. So the guy's making money hand over fist and he's scheming. He's pulling schemes. Hoffenberg is actually eventually indicted for this Ponzi scheme of $462 million, and they defrauded about 200,000 different investors. And Hoffenberg would take the full blame for the Ponzi scheme. And this isn't white collar crime where the guy gets away with 5 years. He's actually given a 20-year prison sentence. But Hoffenberg, this is interesting. Hoffenberg later claims Epstein was the architect of the entire scam. He was pinnacle in creating the scam and even calls him the mastermind behind the technical details of the actual fraud. So Epstein helped design the private placements, selling the bonds from Tower Financial Corporation to investors based on inflated fake actual earnings. So they fake how much money they're actually making, and then they can sell these bonds to the investors. But why didn't Hoffenberg roll over on Epstein in the first place? That's the big question. Why didn't he just say this up front? Because he doesn't say this, he says this like, I don't know how long, like 5, 10 decades later, Hoffenberg is claiming this. So, I mean, who knows? This is coming from the mouth of a criminal. Well, it turns out that according to Hoffenberg, which take this with a grain of salt, according to Hoffenberg, Epstein told him he was protected politically and he was a confidential informant, which is pretty interesting. The architect of the scam completely gets away with it. Is Hoffenberg telling the truth? I mean, who really knows? But we know that Epstein wasn't charged. Now, FBI investigators and the DOJ and the SEC claimed that they knew that Epstein was in the mix. So they didn't make a statement implicating Epstein, knowing that he was, well, however you want to say in the mix, however involved someone is to be in the mix. Maybe not pinnacle, maybe not mastermind, but they said in the mix. So they knew Epstein was in the mix, but they didn't have enough evidence to actually charge him, so they actually didn't end up charging him. And he was reportedly not a confidential informant in this. So he essentially made this up to Hoffenberg to get himself out of that jam so he wouldn't be implicated. But again, the mind games he's playing, the mental warfare to get out of things, the intimidation of saying, I'm protected politically, you don't want to mess with me, something bad will happen to you. All of that is already starting and very prevalent. So I think this is the first concrete example for Epstein where he's using psychological leverage and strategic disinformation to build up his aura of untouchability, right? He's starting to really get away with stuff. Now, keep in mind, the SEC, the DOJ, and the FBI were involved in a joint venture for investigating Towers Financial Corporation. So he evaded being, indicted from the most powerful investigation organizations that there really is, right? So he beat the feds, right? That's what he's thinking in his mind. After the collapse of Towers Financial Corporation in the 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein performs a masterclass at reinvention. He doesn't just get away with these crimes, okay? He used his wealth and his mystique of Billionaire's only money management firm, because he's managing Billionaire's money. He uses that to reinvent himself and move from, a mid-level white-collar fraudster into a real global powerhouse player. So here's what happened next. In 1987, up until the year 2007, Epstein worked for and worked on a guy by the name of Leslie Wexner. This is the guy I told you about earlier. Now, Leslie Wexner is a billionaire. He owns a company called L Brands. L Brands owns Victoria's Secret, Bed Bath & Beyond, Abercrombie & Fitch, and a whole bunch of other companies. He met and was working with Wexner while he was actually working at Towers Financial Corporation. So he's consulting for Towers Financial Corporation before their collapse, and he has his own companies on the side to manage money, manage tax strategies, and whatnot. So this is where he meets Leslie Wexner, and this is going to be absolutely pinnacle for him. But true to Epstein's nature, he somehow weasels his way into Wexner's billionaire company and gets power of attorney. That literally blows my mind. I don't know how he was able to do that. That's the big question mark in my mind. That grants him, literally limitless control over all of his financials, right? His trust, his foundations, just everything. He can literally do just about anything he wants. It's kind of like you're giving him the company because he has the power to make any decision without you actually signing off on it. That's power of attorney. He can do whatever he wants. So let's talk about that for a second. How does Epstein actually gain power of attorney for a man that's in his prime? Basically, Epstein meets him in the 1980s, and there's a guy advising Wexner on his wealth called Herald Levin. Now, Epstein somehow convinces Wexner that Levin is stealing from him, right? So by exposing this supposed threat, Epstein positions himself as kind of like the hero, the only person you can trust, because I found the guy that's stealing from you and I found out how he was doing it. So he's like saving the day. But of course, this is just really a ploy to get Levin out of the mix because Epstein wants to manage his money. He's a billionaire, right? So he tricks him essentially. So fast forward a little bit to 2007. So he meets Wexner in the 1980s and they're working together for many, many years. But in 2007, decades later, Epstein actually gets indicted in Florida for underage sex crime. That's when Wexner starts to think, okay, now I need to distance myself from Epstein because I don't want to be involved in this underage sex crimes, right? So he starts to break ties with Epstein as he's unwinding this power of attorney and figuring out, You know, he doesn't even have his books on everything, so he doesn't even know what exactly is going on. So as he starts to unwind this and break ties with Epstein, he actually finds out that Epstein stole estimated around $46 million from him, right? Like, again, power of attorney. He can write himself checks, and Wexner might not even know about it. He also transfers property, real estate property, from Wexner's name into Epstein's name for $0, right? Including the $20 million Manhattan mansion, which he's very well known for, as well as another $4.5 million mansion in Ohio. However, much later, when Epstein is actually indicted for the crimes we know him for, through a DOJ investigation, we find out that the money that Epstein stole from Wexner is actually much, much more than $46 million. It's actually at least $100 million, if not multiple hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, the big question is, Wexner was 53. He built his billion-dollar companies. He was a business beast. He knew what he was doing, and he was known to be very litigious. So he would sue people on the drop of a hat. However, even though $100 million or more money was stolen from Wexner, he actually never did sue Epstein. So that's the big question, and it's open to complete speculation. Why didn't Wexner go ahead and sue Epstein when he found out about this stuff? Now, they were very, very close for decades, essentially. Epstein had power of attorney, so he knew the inner workings of Wexner's companies. So anytime there's a billion-dollar company, there's most likely quite a few skeletons in the closet of things you don't want to come to light. Plus, through all these parties and social gatherings, did he know something further beyond business about Wexner? Was Wexner into some type of stuff they didn't want to come out? Were they together involved in some type of stuff? Was there any blackmail involved? Because we know what Epstein is going to become much later, and he's very involved in blackmail and recording conversations. He does that in the mansion that he steals from Wexner, the mansion he's known for recording people and committing some of the crimes that we know him for. He stole that entire mansion from Wexner. By the early 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein had begun presenting himself to young women as a powerful connector in the fashion world, and at times claiming he could secure them modeling opportunities with Victoria's Secret. He even said and claimed that he was a Victoria's Secret talent scout. The company has said that he held no official role, but the Victoria's Secret brand name carried enormous cultural weight and provided Epstein with a ready-made aura of legitimacy, and most importantly, served as a strong magnet for women seeking opportunity, in a camouflaged guise or explanation for why this wealthy older man was approaching teenagers and offering travel, money, or mentorship. It lowered their guard, essentially, and got them in a room alone with Epstein. Now, rather than marking the beginning of his abusive behavior, it actually was a calculated shift as he moved to different types of tactics in order to recruit and control. This period coincided with Epstein's deepening ties to retail magnate Leslie Wexner, whose wealth and social standing helped elevate Epstein into elite circles. He actually owned Victoria's Secret. And with the arrival of Ghislaine Maxwell, who prosecutors later said played a key role in facilitating introductions to young women. Together, these relationships gave Epstein access, credibility, and insulation, conditions that allowed what had likely been predatory conduct earlier in his life to evolve into a far more organized and far-reaching system of exploitation. The invocation of the fashion industry, whether real or fabricated, became one of the several carefully chosen facades that masked the machinery operating behind it. So imagine for a second you're a good-looking, very young woman. And imagine that some decently looking old guy comes up to you and says he can make your wildest dreams come true. Whether he's rich or not, that's kind of like gross, right? You would see through that. It seems very suspect. Now imagine for a second you're a billionaire and some other guy comes up to you and he's pitching you his investment services. He wants to manage your money. Again, that completely dissolves the mystique of Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaires only investment club, right? No, Jeffrey Epstein needed someone else to help him. Someone to open up those social circles and social doors. Someone to wine and dine and do the types of things that Jeffrey Epstein absolutely could not do. To grease the wheels, so to speak, so he could maintain his powerful man allure. And this is where Ghislaine Maxwell comes in. Ghislaine didn't just walk into Epstein's world, she fell into it. She was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a larger-than-life British media tycoon who lived like a billionaire, moved like a political insider, and built an empire that looked untouchable, until it wasn't. Robert Maxwell wasn't just a publisher. He had known connections to political and intelligence circles during the Cold War, which only added to his mystique. In 1991, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances after disappearing from his yacht that was out to sea, called the Lady Ghislaine, named after his favorite daughter Ghislaine. Within days, the illusion shattered. Investigators uncovered a massive financial fraud. He had looted hundreds of millions of dollars from his own employees' pension funds to prop up his failing businesses. The empire collapsed almost overnight, and so did the family's fortune. The private jets, the staff, the access, the status, all gone. Ghislaine went from royalty of an international elite to a social exile, with the last name that had suddenly become radioactive. Then, almost perfectly timed, she met Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein offered something she desperately needed. Money, yes, but more importantly, re-entry. He had the cash, the Manhattan townhouse, the private jets, and the connections he was cultivating, the hunger to be accepted by the very world that Ghislaine had already grown up inside. She had polish and pedigree, and the social fluency that Epstein could never manufacture on his own. Where he was awkward and transactional, she was charming and disarming. Together, they became kind of like a two-person bridge. Epstein buying his way into power, and Maxwell translating him for it. And through that partnership formed the machinery that prosecutors would later argue was the foundation for Epstein's operation. The death of Robert Maxwell has long fueled speculation because so many details felt unusual all at once. He reportedly vanished from his yacht in the early morning hours, yet his body was located surprisingly quickly in open water. Questions swirled about whether he fell, jumped, or was pushed. Insurance companies initially resisted paying out policies tied to his death. So, leaning into speculations of his death, some theorized financial motives involving business associates or even family members. As his empire was collapsing, others pointed out his well-documented contacts in intelligence circles and wondered if sensitive information was at risk. Crew accounts were limited and never fully clarified the timeline, and the autopsy, while it was actually ruled drowning, subsequent autopsies discovered blunt force trauma to the skull, which maybe explained him hitting his head on the side of the boat as he fell overboard, but it's commonly unresolved. How exactly did he enter the water? None of these threads have ever really produced definitive proof of foul play, but together they created a cloud of suspicion that still surrounds his final hours. So Ghislaine's father dies, which she absolutely adored him, and all the big money lifestyle and her reputation as prestigious is shattered by the scandal of her father stealing money from his companies and the pension funds. Ghislaine, coming from big money in a huge social circle, needed to find a new man to fill that void, and eventually Epstein is the perfect person. Being about 8 years her senior, he becomes her boyfriend. He has money, and he had a decent reputation, which by this time was something of a mysterious playboy type of vibe. And also very, very rich. Nobody knows how Epstein made his money, and that was the mystique. Ghislaine, on the other hand, would fulfill what Epstein needs: a facilitator, a face, the reputation and social standing of old money that Ghislaine already had. She knows everyone already. She knows how to entertain, wine and dine. Epstein is notoriously a bad host, while Ghislaine is the exact opposite, a social butterfly that everyone falls in love with and is the life of any party. And as an example of what she brings to the table, she already knew and went to school with people like Prince Andrew, royalty. Just to give you an idea of the type of doors that she was opening up for Epstein. And she was absolutely pinnacle in being a facilitator of that role. Once Epstein had Ghislaine Maxwell on board, she didn't just throw parties like we mentioned. She actually became a recruiter of young women. She knew exactly how to make them feel at ease because she was a beautiful, high social standing woman, drawing in girls who were often disenfranchised, desperate, or even traumatized themselves. She offered them a little cash, maybe $200, in exchange for massaging an old man, quote unquote. And at first, she did things face to face, charming and coaxing them herself. But soon, it turned into a literal pyramid scheme. The woman that she recruited would then go out and recruit themselves, letting Maxwell stay one step removed while the operation grew. And there was always a shadow hanging over it, powerful, threatening energy that made it clear that for any one of these girls stepping out of line and reporting the types of crimes that were happening, that wasn't an option. One survivor even described walking inside the Epstein residence at Palm Beach and seeing walls full of photos with Epstein standing next to presidents, celebrities, and even billionaires. That served as a silent warning that you're dealing with someone that has extreme power, certainly capable to silence you. The audacity that Epstein actually had, creating a pyramid scheme out of actual people for these quote-unquote romantic crimes, it obviously could not stay hidden forever. And pressure was so intense that in Palm Beach, one mother finally went to police, forcing her daughter to confide and tell what happened. Yet, even then, the system barely even moved. By the mid-2000s, the Palm Beach Police Department had actually begun to investigate Epstein, following these claims of this victim, the mothers, and they found a shockingly huge amount of victims that were actually teenagers. But even under this investigation, Epstein wasn't just sitting back. For one, he donated $100,000 to the Palm Beach Police Department, a move that bought him authority, access, and influence. And in this case, it really just slowed the entire gears of justice of this investigation. As investigators are investigating Epstein, he actually went on the offensive. He wasn't sitting back. He hired a whole slew of private investigators to do counterintelligence on both the police and to intimidate victims. They called victims. They posed as police officers themselves on the phone. They made threats. In some cases, they stood all night outside of victims' bedrooms and shined their bright lights on their cars just so that they know that, hey, we're here and you're not going to get rid of us. And obviously, that's going to scare a lot of victims. So the Palm Beach Police Department actually went and raided Epstein's house in Palm Beach. But apparently, Epstein was tipped off because they found some evidence, but not a whole lot of stuff they could actually use. So these private investigators had actually infiltrated the Palm Beach Police Department, and perhaps that $100,000 that he donated bought him that tip. They found things like computer wires that were going to computers that were missing, or even computers that were there that were missing all hard drives. They had no hard drives, so they knew that they had been removed, and that led to them to think that there was an actual tip-off. Palm Beach police officer Michael Reiter, who was heavily involved in the investigation, seemed to notice that the investigation was stalling for what seemed to be no real reason, because they had a whole bunch of evidence, a whole bunch of victims that were most of which willing to testify. So he made a bold move, and he actually referred the case to the FBI. So with the investigation stalling out in Palm Beach, the FBI takes over. But by this time, Epstein uses his money and he hires an all-star team of lawyers built on top of his all-star team of private investigators who are not only trying to intimidate witnesses, but they're trying to dig up dirt and intimidate law enforcement that are investigating Epstein. Enter Alex Acosta, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida. And with Epstein facing literal decades behind prison for the alleged crimes, it actually ends in this controversial sweetheart deal of a lifetime for Epstein. The original charges that Epstein's actually facing in this prosecution are sex trafficking of a minor, conspiracy to commit sex trafficking, as well as crossing state lines with a minor with the intention to commit sexual activities. But in a twist of events, somehow Epstein is able to plead only to the lesser state charges of prostitution of a minor and soliciting a prostitute. And he gets sentenced to 18 months and only serves 13 months, which is a huge controversy. He's facing decades and he only serves 13 months. And of course, these girls are minors. They're not prostitutes, but somehow they are named prostitutes. So why was this the sweetheart deal of a lifetime? Well, for one, he's facing decades in prison and he only gets 13 months. But they also sentenced him on this federal charge to serve in Palm Beach at the county jail, which allows him to be very close to home. And get this, because this is great. It's actually a work release program. So he gets out of jail 6 days a week. 6 days a week. He gets out of jail for 12 hours a day. Now, on top of that, he gets immunity for both himself and for all of his co-conspirators, whether they're named or unnamed, which includes Ghislaine Maxwell. So he's escaping prosecution on any further charges for this, but it also grants immunity to the co-conspirators. So they're not going to snitch on him if they already have that immunity. And obviously, Ghislaine probably knows everything, so that gives her immunity and a big old bow on top of this whole thing for him. The deal of a lifetime. So he serves his time. He becomes a registered sex offender, and he's technically on probation at this point and restricted from leaving Palm Beach, where he lives. He cannot leave Palm Beach, but he repeatedly violates probation. He flies to New York. He goes to the Virgin Islands. The cops, they're not really willing to do anything because he's such a hassle to deal with and he's such a powerful person. And he continues, even though he's a registered sex offender, he continues to rub elbows with celebrities, politicians, and billionaires, and he's just running his empire. It's still business as usual after this prison sentence for him. This seems pretty surprising that it would be able to keep all of these connections and people wouldn't run for the hills with the type of crimes that he had. But that's probably because when the crime happened, he was rushed into the court, rushed to sign the deal, and rushed out. So there weren't very many court pictures. There weren't any much reporting on it. It was all a very hush-hush thing through the specialized broker deal with Alex Acosta. And on top of that, when he went to jail for 13 months, he was out almost every single day for 12 hours a day. So it's likely that a lot of these people didn't actually really know about the sex crimes that he was accused of. And one of the big controversies and one of the worst parts was the victims that he committed these crimes against, they actually had no voice. So through a loophole in Florida's Victims Acts right, Epstein was able to broker this plea deal, and the victims don't really actually get the information that there's a plea deal or a plea deal negotiation even happening. So the victims go to court thinking they're going to get this day in court so they can be heard, they can face Epstein finally when they're protected, and they can put this guy away. But he's rushed into the courtroom, signs the deal, rushed out. So victims actually never really get a voice in this. And some victims later actually sued the federal government against, and the prosecutors against, the lack of victims' rights, arguing that they should have been notified about this plea deal happening and, allowed to either testify against them or make a statement, a victim's impact statement, which they were essentially not able to do.
Do you have any remorse for your actions against these victims that led to your plea of guilty?
Even after Epstein was a registered sex offender, his bank account just kept growing. And one of his biggest connections that he ever had was Leon Black, the billionaire co-founder of Apollo Global Management, a money management firm itself. Black wasn't just a Wall Street titan, he was powerful, wealthy, and connected. And he was kind of a client that could legitimize Epstein's financial empire. Reports suggest that Epstein advised Black primarily on tax evasion strategies through his Virgin Island tax shelters. It's reported that Epstein made $150 to $170 million in fees from his dealings with Black. So if Leslie Wexner was the jackpot, then Leon Black was the great white whale. Even after serving his Palm Beach sentence, Epstein kept partying, exploiting women, and growing his wealth, like nothing really had ever happened. But unlike before, he would not see what was coming next. In 2018, the Miami Herald published a bombshell article on Epstein, ran by Julie K. Brown. Originally, it was meant to be a social piece on the mysterious ultra-wealthy billionaire with no Wall Street paper trail, which intrigued people.
Well, they absolutely have files that they can release. They could release his autopsy report, for example.
But that quickly transformed into dozens of new sex victims and fresh evidence on Epstein, which actually would reignite the case and brought to light the hush-hush 2008 Florida sweetheart deal.
Alex Acosta had a 60-count federal indictment ready to go against all kinds of people for an interstate sex trafficking conspiracy. And he traded that 60-count federal indictment for 1 count in state court.
Authorities simultaneously indicted Epstein while at the same time raiding his New York City mansion. Unlike in Florida, he didn't have a tip or a heads up where he could dispose of evidence. They found hundreds, if not thousands, of nude pictures of underage girls among a whole slew of brand new evidence. However, this wasn't the first time that Epstein had been in a similar circumstance and escaped. But this time would actually be different. And one of the major points of contention was if Epstein would get a bond. And Epstein and his lawyers offered $100 million to try and get bond just so he could get out of jail and prepare his legal defense. They even offered all of his wealth, which at that time was around $500 million and change. When they raided his New York City mansion, they found a safe. And inside of that safe, they found fake passports, including a fake Austrian passport, and diamonds, which could be used to exchange as currency. So they labeled this as his escape plan. The judge ruled against giving him a bond, so they did not give him a bond because he was a flight risk, he was so rich, and he had this literal escape plan that they found. So the walls are closing in on Epstein. He's arrested at Teterboro Airport. As soon as he gets off the plane coming from France, he didn't expect it because he probably would have never came. They raid his mansion. They get a whole bunch of new evidence, but of course they need a warrant for that. So the Miami Herald, the article from Miami, found new victims that were not included in the Florida sweetheart deal. So they had new victims, and the FBI reopened the case, and they found victims that were actually in New York jurisdiction. So they had a whole bunch of new victims that had nothing to do with the original Florida trial. Because if you remember, the sweetheart deal of the Florida trial actually gave him immunity and all his co-conspirators immunity, so they couldn't be prosecuted further. But a judge in Florida argued that the immunity in Florida should be held up, and that's what the judge actually agreed with. But New York prosecutors argued that Florida does not hold jurisdiction to crimes committed and executed in New York. Plus, there were new victims, a whole bunch of new evidence. So the trial actually allowed the entire Florida case of evidence and original sweetheart deal Florida victims to be included in this trial. So not only was there a whole bunch of new victims and new evidence, but they were including all of the Florida stuff, which he was already facing decades in prison for that. It also brought in Alex Acosta's sweetheart deal into contention.
I do not think it is right and fair for this administration's Labor Department to have Epstein as the focus rather than the incredible economy that we have today. And so I called the president this morning. I told him that I thought the right thing was to step aside. It would be selfish for me to stay in this position and continue talking about a case that's 12 years old.
So at this point, the Epstein trial is looking like possibly one of the trials of the century, and everyone's glued to their TV and the news. They want to see what's going on with that, and it's not looking good for Epstein. There's a lot of evidence against him. But what happened next, nobody really saw coming. When Epstein is denied bond and he knows he can't get out, he's actually found dead inside of his cell at the prison. And it's ruled a self-hanging.
A statement appearing to confirm Jeffrey Epstein's death before it officially happened has surfaced among the millions of files released last weekend. The statement from the US Attorney's Office is dated August 9th, 2019, while the Standard account says the file was found in his cell at 6:30 a.m. on August 10th. His unexpected death in custody came as he was being held ahead of his trial for conspiracy and sex trafficking.
As it turns out, the high-profile Epstein, where there were supposed to be cameras recording him at all times, 24/7, the cameras didn't record anything, and there's no actual evidence of the self-hanging. So that fueled a whole bunch of wild speculation and conspiracy theories. The jail where he was at is notoriously understaffed and underfunded, so it's not too far out of the realm. It could have happened, but he was denied bail. He probably knew he was never going to get out. So was Epstein's death part of a conspiracy that is not self-hanging, where a powerful person actually got to him and was able to essentially murder him? Is that possible? Epstein did a lot of deplorable things. Epstein was known to use underage women and record everything, so he's known for having this blackmail ring. So is that part of what might have happened? We're completely speculating at this point. He's tied to everyone, politicians, billionaires. There's so many people he's tied to, or at least there's pictures of him with, so draw your own conclusions. So, I mean, if it was that type of situation, they could have maybe paid a guard to turn off the cameras and do that deed, or maybe something simpler. Maybe it was actually one of the inmates. The inmates already just hate that type of activity, so it's possible it could have been that. But here's the thing. 2 days before Epstein is actually found dead in his cell, he moves all of his money into a private trust. All about $577 million is moved into a private trust. And that's like the final screw you to the government and the victims, because now they can't receive any type of compensation. They can't get to the money for the victims. The government can't seize anything. You know, the money's essentially tied up. So if he moved his money into a trust, which it wasn't in before, 2 days before his death, that does point a strong finger at he was probably knowing that he was on the end of his rope and did himself that self-harm. But there's no shortage of conspiracy theories behind Epstein. But the death of Epstein isn't the end of the story. We still have Ghislaine Maxwell, because right after Epstein dies, which they're still going on with this trial, and they want to have some type of completion for that. But we now have Ghislaine, so Ghislaine Maxwell is indicted, and she basically goes on the run. And she's known to have, recruited victims and been just as involved in the nefarious acts. So she's definitely not innocent. She goes on the run, and she's found in New Hampshire, and authorities found her phone was wrapped in tinfoil. So she was trying to essentially avoid tracking her phone. So we really strongly believe she was in hiding because no one knew where she was. But in July 2020, authorities finally arrest her, and she's charged with sex trafficking of minors, conspiracy, and enticing underage girls, leading to a high-profile federal trial that lasted about only 6 weeks towards the end of late 2021. And the trial ends with her conviction on multiple counts, and she's sentenced to 20 years in prison. Again, she's actually transferred to Club Fed. Club Fed is in Texas. It's kind of like where people go that get high-profile treatment, special treatment, private chefs, special meals, more rec time, full access to lawyers and visits and stuff like that. There's a couple of other high-profile individuals that are actually housed there, particularly Elizabeth Holmes, who committed the giant fraud of Theranos, Silicon Valley, youngest female billionaire of all times. And she serves, I believe she got 11 years for that fraud. That's just an example of the type of people that are at Club Fed, people that get special treatment, the rich. But the story really doesn't end there, because there's still unfinished business about the Epstein files. They're still constantly releasing new documents, pictures, and following up on this Epstein ordeal. So there's still more stuff coming out. It's an ongoing story. For example, Ghislaine Maxwell is supposed to testify for the first time, and we'll see what she says about Epstein. Is she going to remain silent and plead the fifth, or is she actually going to divulge some type of decent information? I mean, who knows? Also, even more interesting, we have former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, which are supposed to testify in regards to the Epstein files. They've been fighting this for a really long time, but supposedly they're being forced to testify under the Trump administration. So kind of looking forward to seeing what they're going to say. Are they going to just go ahead and plead fifth? I mean, you definitely see Bill Clinton in a whole bunch of pictures with Epstein. He plastered all over the pictures with Epstein. So that's going to be interesting. Something coming up to look forward to. Woo! Finally! That was a long video, but we finally got through it. Guys, I had a great time. I hope you did too. If you haven't already, help me out. I need your help. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. We got a lot of videos coming out. We got some really good ones coming out really, really soon. So, guys, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything. And with that, I will catch you on the next one. Peace.